That smile was not grief, it was not anger. It was something quieter than both and far more final. Harriet had been smiling that way for 11 years. Not at anyone, not for anyone, just a small private arrangement of her face that meant she had understood something and chosen not to say so. But that evening, seated at the long dinner table in Caldwell House, with 12 guests watching, and the candlelight pulling shadows across the silver, the smile meant something different. She set down her fork with the same deliberate care she brought to everything, and she looked at her husband across the table, and she smiled. He had called her by the wrong name. Not a slip. Not the stumble of a tired man reaching for a word. He had said it with full confidence, mid-sentence, while telling a story to the Pemberton solicitor about a trip to Halifax 3 summers prior. Adelaide managed the whole correspondence herself, he'd said, gesturing toward her with his wine glass. Adelaide always kept things well in hand. Her name was Harriet. It had always been Harriet. She had signed his letters Harriet, embroidered her initials into the household linen, written the word on every envelope and account ledger for 11 years. The guests at the table shifted in their seats. Mrs. Drummond, seated to Harriet's left, looked quickly down at her soup. Harriet set down her fork. She smiled, and she thought, that's the point at which I knew. She had come to the marriage at 22, which was not especially young for that period. Late enough, her mother had suggested, to understand what she was accepting, early enough to still adapt. The Caldwells were a respected name in the county. Henry Caldwell was 12 years her senior, steady in his habits, not unkind, not warm. He had inherited the estate from his uncle and run it as his uncle had run it before him, with the assumption that the machinery would function as long as no one looked too closely at the gears. Harriet was, from the start, a gear. She had understood this gradually, the way you understand the structure of a house not by being told its design, but by living inside it, until you've memorized every creak, every draft, every room that no one uses. Henry did not dislike her. She was reasonably certain of that. He relied on her in the way a man relies on a well-fitted coat. Without gratitude, without examination, without it once occurring to him to wonder whether the coat might have preferred to hang somewhere else. She managed the household accounts. She corresponded with the tenants when disputes arose. She arranged the seasonal staff rotations, organized the social calendar, oversaw the kitchen garden expansion of 1879, resolved a long-standing drainage dispute with the Whitmore property through 4 months of patient letter writing that saved Henry the cost of a solicitor. She did all of this without being asked, because it needed doing, because she was there, because she was the kind of woman who finished what she started, even when no one noticed she had started at all. Henry, for his part, managed the estate's principal affairs, met with his land agent on Tuesdays, attended the county meetings, and rode out to the North Fields most mornings before breakfast. He was not a frivolous man. He worked. He simply did not notice that she did too. This was not, Harriet had decided long ago, a moral failing on his part. It was something more structural than that. He had been raised to expect that certain things would simply be done, and he had married her in part because he sensed, correctly, that she was the kind of person who would do them. There was no malice in it. There was, in fact, almost nothing in it at all. That was the part she had never been able to explain to anyone, in those early years when she might still have tried. It was not that he was cruel to her. It was that he was almost entirely unaware of her. Not as a person capable of discontent, capable of loneliness, capable of the small and specific hunger of wanting to be known by someone who saw her as more than competent. She had tried, twice, to speak of it. The first time was in their 3rd year, after a dinner party at which Henry had accepted credit, in front of 6 guests. For a resolution to the tenancy dispute Harriet had spent 2 months engineering. She had not expected him to give her public credit. That was not the world they lived in. But she had hoped, afterward, alone in the study where he was reviewing the week's correspondence, that he might say something, might turn from the desk and say, "That was your doing, wasn't it? I should have mentioned it." She had stood at the doorway for a full minute. He had not turned around. She had gone to bed. She tried again in their 6th year, on an evening when the accounts had come out badly wrong, due to an error by the steward, and she had corrected them, and she told Henry directly, sitting across from him at the very same dinner table that would later witness his mistake. She said, "I've been carrying a great deal of this quietly, Henry, and I wonder sometimes if you know that." He had looked up from his plate with the expression of a man who had just been told the chimney needed repointing. Not dismissive, exactly, but operating in a register where this information was practical rather than personal. He'd said, "You do it very well," and then reached for the bread, and the conversation had moved on. She did not try a 3rd time. Not because she gave up on being heard, but because she understood by then that there was no mechanism for it. She was not a person to him in the way he was a person to himself. She was a function, a pleasant, capable, well-managed function, and the house ran on her, the way the county road ran on stone and gravel. You didn't thank the gravel. So she did what many women of her time and circumstance did when they understood there was no point in speaking. She turned inward. She got very good at the work. She kept her own counsel, her own reading, her own small pleasures. The kitchen garden in August, the correspondence with her cousin in Montreal, the Wednesday afternoons she reserved for herself without explanation, which Henry never once questioned because he rarely tracked where she was when she wasn't directly in front of him, and she began, very quietly, to build a second life. It did not look dramatic from the outside. Most of what Harriet built was invisible, which was fitting, since she had learned invisibility from a master. She set aside a portion of her household budget each quarter, small amounts, unremarkable, absorbed into the ledgers without notice. She converted a piece of her personal inheritance, left to her by her grandmother, and placed it with a solicitor in Halifax rather than the one in town. She corresponded with her cousin Nora, her unmarried, self-sufficient, startlingly capable cousin Nora, about practical matters. The rental market in certain neighborhoods, the rates charged for rooms, the process by which a woman might establish a small income from needle-lace commission work if she were so inclined. She was so inclined. It took 4 years. 4 years of the kind of preparation that looks, from the outside, like nothing. The kitchen garden expanded again. The tenancy accounts remained immaculate. Henry dined well and rode out to the North Fields and met with his land agent on Tuesdays, and did not notice that his wife was, with great patience and no urgency, arranging for the day she would no longer be there. She had told herself, for a long time, that she was simply keeping options open, that she was not planning to leave so much as ensuring she could, if she chose to, which was different. But sometime in the 10th year she acknowledged to herself, sitting alone in the kitchen garden in August, her hands in the soil, the house silent behind her, that she had made her decision years ago, and had simply been waiting to be certain. The certainty arrived on a Wednesday evening in October, in the form of a dinner party and a name that was not her Sud, Adelaide. After the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Harriet stood at the window of the small sitting room and thought about Adelaide. She did not know an Adelaide. Henry had not, as far as she was aware, known an Adelaide. The name seemed to have arrived from some compartment of his mind that held women who managed things reliably, and it had settled on her without his noticing the substitution. He had not corrected himself at the table. He had continued the story. The Pemberton solicitor had glanced at Harriet and then looked away, and the conversation had moved on, and no one had said, "That is not her name." She had smiled, set down her fork, let the dinner conclude. Henry found her in the sitting room an hour later. He looked mildly uncomfortable in the particular way of men who suspect they have done something wrong but would prefer not to specify what, because specifying it requires acknowledging it. "You were quiet this evening," he said. "Was I?" she said. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "You seemed tired." "I am not tired," she said. There was a silence. Henry looked at her in the careful, assessing way he occasionally looked at a problem on the estate. Not with hostility, but with the faint frustration of a thing that wasn't fitting into its expected category. "Is something the matter?" he asked. "You called me Adelaide at the table," she said, in front of the Pemberton solicitor and Mr. and Mrs. Drummond and the others. His face moved through several small adjustments. "Did I?" "You did." "I don't." He paused. "I wasn't aware." "No," she said. "You weren't." There was another silence, longer this time. Henry looked as though he were preparing to say something that would adequately address the situation without requiring him to examine it too closely. She knew that look. She had watched him use it on difficult tenants and on his mother when she visited and on the drainage problem before she solved it for him. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "It was an error." "Yes," she said. "I'm not sure where that name came from." "I'm not either," he nodded, as though this had been adequately resolved. "Well, I'll say good night then. You should sleep." She looked at him. At this man she had lived beside for 11 years, who had just called her by another woman's name in front of a room full of people, and now wanted to say good night and go to bed and have it be resolved. "Good night, Henry," she said. He went upstairs. She sat in the chair for another hour, in the dark, and thought about what she would need to pack. She had not planned to leave before sunrise. That detail was simply how it worked out. She had planned to leave on a Thursday, 2 weeks after the dinner. Quietly, during the hour when Henry was meeting with his land agent. She had written to Nora. The arrangements were made. The small trunk with the things that mattered. The letters from Montreal, her grandmother's brooch, the household account books, from the years she had kept them, which she took not as theft but as record, as evidence of what she had contributed to this house, was already packed and sitting in the back of the linen closet. But on the Wednesday night, 3 days before she'd planned, she lay awake in her separate bedroom and listened to the house and understood that she did not want to do it in the daytime. She did not want to walk past the kitchen staff and the steward and the gardener. She did not want Henry to come out of the study and see her in the hallway with her trunk. She did not want to have another conversation like the sitting room conversation, in which he would say something that almost approached the meta, but did not reach it, and she would have to stand there and watch him not reach it. And she would feel, as she always felt in those moments, both sorry for him and very tired. She got up at 4 in the morning. She dressed in the dark. She was very good at things like this. Practical, quiet, not prone to fumbling. She carried her trunk down the back stairs that the kitchen staff used, which she knew would not creak at the 4th step or the 9th if you stepped to the far left. She had known this for 11 years. She had lived in this house long enough to know every way out. She left a letter on the desk in the study. Not the kitchen table, the desk, where he worked, where he would find it in the morning, when he sat down with his correspondence. She had thought carefully about where to leave it. The letter said what she needed it to say. It was not short. It was not unkind. She had written it over the course of a month, in the evenings, in her small, careful handwriting, and it said everything she had not said in 11 years, not as accusation, not as indictment, but as account. This is what I did in this house. This is what I felt. This is what I tried to tell you, and when. This is why I am leaving. She signed it, Harriet, not your wife, not H. Harriet. Her name. The name he had not called her at the dinner table, the name that had apparently become so familiar to him that it had ceased to register as hers specifically, had blurred into the general category of woman who manages things, the way wallpaper blurs when you've stopped seeing the room. She wanted, at least, to put her name plainly at the end. Nora met her at the corner of Birch and Water Streets in Dartmouth at 8:30 that morning. Harriet had taken the first coach, which left the village at 5, and had sat in the dark interior for the full journey with her trunk between her feet and the letter's absence behind her like a door she'd shut, and was not going to turn around to check. You look well, Nora said. I feel strange, Harriet said. That's normal, Nora said. It passes. The rooms Nora had arranged were small and clean, on the second floor of a house owned by a widow named Mrs. Park, who rented to respectable women and did not ask unnecessary questions. There was a writing desk, a window that faced east, a modest hearth. Harriet stood in the center of the room and looked at the writing desk and thought, I can work here. That was the first thing she thought. Not, I am free, not, I am frightened. She thought, I can work here, which perhaps said something about her. Henry found the letter on Thursday morning. Harriet knew this because a week later, she received a letter from him, addressed correctly to Mrs. Harriet Caldwell, which she noted, delivered to the Dartmouth address through the solicitor's office. He had written it himself. That surprised her, somewhat. She had half expected it to be formal, dictated, the language of a man who had handed the difficulty off to someone else to phrase. But it was in his handwriting, angular and economical, and it did not read like a dictated letter. He said he had read her letter several times. He said he did not know how to answer most of it. He said he had not been aware, and he understood that this itself was the problem she was describing, and he was not certain what to do with that. He said he did not want to ask her to come back in order for things to continue as they had. He had read what she wrote about those years. He did not want to argue that she had misremembered. He said he would like to understand, if she was willing, what things would have to be different, if anything could be. He asked her to have a cup of tea with him, not at Caldwell House, in town, somewhere neutral, as two people who had made an error together, as she had put it in her letter, and were trying to see clearly. He signed it, Henry. Harriet read the letter twice. She put it on the writing desk and looked at it for a long time. She thought about the dinner table. She thought about the 6th year, and the accounts, and you do it very well. She thought about the linen closet and the 4 years of quiet, patient preparation, and what it had meant that she'd needed 4 years, and what it said about both of them that neither of them had brought it to a head sooner. She thought about the letter she'd written, the month of evenings, the careful handwriting, the way she'd signed it. She thought. He asked. That was not nothing. It was not enough, perhaps, but it was not the nothing she'd expected. She wrote back. She said she would have tea with him, she said. She was not willing to discuss coming back to Caldwell House, not yet, and perhaps not ever, and he should understand that before they met. She said she had a meeting with her cousin on Tuesday mornings, and an appointment with a commission agent on Thursday afternoons, and she was not rearranging either. She said, Wednesday at 2 o'clock, the tea room on Granville Street. She signed it, Harriet. He was there when she arrived. Sitting at a table by the window, already holding a cup, looking out at the street with the expression of a man who was not entirely sure what the next hour was going to require of him, but had decided to sit still and find out. He stood when he saw her. That was something. She sat down. The server came. She ordered tea. She folded her hands on the table and looked at her husband, whom she had not seen in 10 days, and who looked, she thought, like a man who had spent those 10 days having a conversation with himself that he was not used to having. Thank you for coming, he said. You asked sensibly, she said. I thought I'd see what came of it. There was a pause. Henry looked at his cup. I read your letter 4 times, he said. The accounts, the tenants, the correspondence with the Whitmore property. The drainage dispute, she said. 4 months, he said. You never mentioned it. I mentioned it once, she said. You said it was handled. He was quiet for a moment. I thought you meant, he stopped. You thought I meant you had handled it. He did not deny this. That too was something. I didn't know, he said. That's the part I keep arriving at. I didn't know. And I'm aware that saying that doesn't make it better. But I have been trying to understand how I didn't know, and the answer I keep arriving at is that I didn't ask. I didn't ask what you were doing. I assumed it was happening because it always had happened, and I didn't trace it back to you. No, Harriet said. You didn't. Was there a time? He said, carefully. She looked at him. The 3rd year, she said. And the 6th. He nodded slowly. He had the look of a man doing sums. The dinner with the Bellamys, he said, of the 3rd year. You stood in the doorway. She went still. You saw me. I didn't know what to say, he said. I should have turned around. I didn't. They sat with that for a moment. Henry, she said finally. I'm not angry. I haven't been angry in a long time. What I have is clarity. I know what that house costs me. I know what the work is, what it's been, what the years have added up to, and I know that I am more than capable of building something outside of it, which I am doing. I am not asking you to feel guilty about the past. I am asking you to understand that I cannot return to something that will not be different. Henry looked at his cup for a long time. What would different look like, he said. It was, she thought, the right question. Perhaps the first right question he had asked her in 11 years. Maybe ever. She had thought about this. She had spent 10 days in her small, clean room, with the east-facing window, working at the writing desk, and she had thought about this the way she thought about the drainage dispute, methodically, practically, without sentiment. You would need to know what I do, she said, not to be told about it after, to ask, and to be interested in the answer. You would need to treat the work I bring to the estate as work, not as background. I would need my own income, separate from the household accounts, from the commission work I am building. I would need Wednesday afternoons. I would need to know that if you have something to say about my life, or my name, or whether I am tired or not tired, you will say it plainly and in time, not when a crisis has already arrived. She paused. And I am not moving back to Caldwell House. If there is going to be anything, it will have to be built here, in Dartmouth, on ground that neither of us has already shaped into the wrong thing. Henry was very still. He was looking at her, actually looking at her, she thought, in the way he very rarely did, as though he were seeing not a function or a position or a name he kept forgetting to verify, but a person who had decided something. That is a great deal, he said at last. Yes, she said. It is. I'm not sure I know how to do all of that. No, she said. I don't imagine you do at first. He picked up his cup, put it down again, looked out the window at Granville Street, where the November light was flat and gray and honest. I would like to try, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the morning she'd left, the 4th step from the bottom, the desk where she'd left the letter, her name signed plainly at the end. She thought about the kitchen garden in August, and the linen closet, and the 4 years of preparation, and what it said about both of them that this was where they had arrived. 10 days after a dinner party and a wrong name, in a tea room on Granville Street, with the whole thing still uncertain and the outcome nowhere close to guaranteed. I know, she said. She picked up her tea. The cup was warm in her hands. Then we'll sit there, she said.